So what do you think how should Americans counteract this kind of Chinese propaganda, and what should they be primarily concerned with regarding the Chinese Communist Party?
I think we have to adopt an approach that the Secretary Pompeo correctly employed. That is, we should start with the assumption that the Chinese Communist Party cannot be trusted. And then it's incumbent upon them to prove otherwise. So that is distrust and verify. Because if you start with another assumption that Chinese government is redeemable in their global strategy and their practice and their egregious violation of human rights at home and abroad, I might say, and then you lose half of the battle already, because the burden of proof of goodness should be upon them, not upon us.
I'd actually like to talk a little bit more about your background. You're from mainland China. You got your PhD in the United States in the early 90s. I'm curious how you ended up going from, a Chinese citizen to your position as a China hawk in the U.S.
Well, first of all, I don't consider myself a hawk. I'm probably a bird of a better quality. I would say maybe a Oriole. I mean, I'm next to Baltimore, or a Canadian goose. So,
Lovely birds.
that's right, lovely birds. Yeah. So I have a fish pond here. So hawks are one of my worst enemies because they try to eat my fish. So the idea of labeling people's position on China as hawks or doves were not really entirely useful, because the nature and direction of the U.S.-China relationship were not really decided by the temperature of our China policy. Hawks or doves, ultimately, they play no role in deciding the ultimate direction of the U.S.-China relationship. We have to give the Chinese Communist Party its agency in developing and maintaining this relationship. Every single moment in U.S.-China relationship when dramatic events took place and causes in great disturbance, it's not because there's hawks or doves in Washington. It's because what Chinese government did or does. For example, the U.S.-China relationship went nosedive after 1989 Tiananmen massacre. We didn't do it. The Chinese government should bear responsibility for that worsening of U.S.-China relationship, right? So every single moment is about that. So that's one thing. My personal journey actually is interesting only to myself. I came from China, but I will say I do have a personal experience of living under that regime. I was pretty taken by how influential during the Cold War, the immigrants to United States from Eastern Europe, from the Soviet Union, were, because they provide not only the narratives about the regime in Moscow, or in Prague, or in Warsaw, they also provide much deeper philosophical and intellectual understanding of the nature of the struggle between the free world and the totalitarian regime in the Eastern blocs. So, and that's basically inspired me to be more active, to get into the policy. I remember I was completely shocked on the first day of the opening of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. At the time, I was a graduate student doing research in the National Archives in D.C. When I visited that museum, and my conscience was deeply shaken, because I saw the massacre of 6 million Jewish people in a faraway land could be remembered and could be honored 500 feet away from Washington Monument. And as a reminder to the world what evil can do to humanity. And I was ashamed of being a Chinese citizen at the time. I was also ashamed of being a historian for having failed to document or contributing to the memories of the tens of millions of Chinese people who perished under the Chinese Communist regime. So it is the sharp contrast between living in the totalitarian regime like China and then living in total freedom like living in the United States that really sort of give me the intellectual impetus to do what I'm doing and to say what I'm saying. And not as a policy advocate, but as a free person. And I think every person with the experience like the one I have should have the responsibility to basically to tell the world the fundamental difference and the stake of freedom to all of us. If we don't do that, and we should all be ashamed.
I mean, now that you mention it, it means so much to have like the Holocaust Museum in the seat of power of the U.S. government, to have that monument of how bad things can get when government power runs unchecked. And that's definitely not a message the Communist Party is ever pushing.
You're absolutely right. And I also might say, Chris, you are the host of a very influential program. And I think what you're doing is tremendously helpful because a China Uncensored or Unscripted is a China that will be free because freedom and the censorship do not go together. So you're doing the noble cause as well. You're on a noble mission too.
Well, thank you. This is why you're my favorite China Oriole.
Okay, great. That's not the reciprocal sort of a mutual admiration.
I mean, yeah, the Oriole's, it's one of the best birds, so it's up there.
I have the misperception that you've been Canadian, so I was going to say something about blue jays as being good birds too.
Oh. Well, it's nice that you could still have a good opinion of me, even thinking that I was Canadian. But
yeah. Canadian has a lot of
red-blooded American.
Canadian has a lot of lakes. I like that.
Well, I know you also said you've been were very inspired by President Ronald Reagan. I'm curious what caught your attention.
American presidents are important because the power given to them by the U.S. Constitution, but also American president is looked upon by a lot of people in the world as the leader of the free world. And for that, the American president has a lot of real power, but also the most important power is power of inspiration. So to be a president is not easy. That means you have to understand the inspirational side of the American presidency, not only for American, but also Americans, for a lot of people in the world. Ronald Reagan was one of the few people who could articulate with crystal clarity what American democracy means, not just for Americans, but also for a lot of people in the world. So he was a guy who could speak to the hearts of people who live in the repressive regimes. My inspiration I was greatly inspired by President Reagan during the 1980 presidential election when I heard him debate Mr. Carter, the only presidential debate at the time. And I heard over Voice America simulcast in Mandarin. So that was really, really good. And President Reagan addressed literally a global audience about what American democracy means and what freedom means to every American and every people in the world aspiring to be free. So that was tremendously inspirational. In other words, Ronald Reagan, living through the Great Depression, living through the New Deal, living through the 1950s, very ideologically charged, living through how the Soviet infiltration worked in American elite circles, and he understood not only the operational side of the communist movement, but also he understand the ideological side of that. And I think that's something that's very rare and very, very unique.